Good morning, everybody. This is a live emergency briefing as the threat of a derecho is starting to increase, and that includes a widespread damaging wind threat, basically from western Nebraska. Supercell is expected to initiate first by the middle to later afternoon across the Nebraska Panhandle, and then spread southeast across southwestern Nebraska, eventually pushing into northern Kansas as well. And definitely looks like a large damaging windbag event. You're looking at the loop right now for the HRRR model. This is the 12Z HRRR, and that shows the development of these storms across the Nebraska Panhandle, eventually even pushing into western Missouri late night tonight into the early morning hours. The Storm Prediction Center has an enhanced risk for this zone stretching from the Nebraska Panhandle. Those supercell storms initiate very close to the Cheyenne area, Nebraska Panhandle, and then push into the southwestern portion of the state. You're probably going to have a very fast-moving supercell storm diving southeast near the McCook area, eventually passing into far northwestern Kansas. And there's the complex of storms that is exiting Oklahoma so far this morning, and that's leaving a large blob of relatively stable air in its wake. We'll call it a cold pool so far, but it is going to be destabilizing during the day today. Storm Prediction Center probabilities for the windbag stretch from southwestern Nebraska, basically near the Lake McConaughey area, down across northern Kansas, including the I-70 corridor from Colby east, and that significant windbag potential all the way down into northeastern New Mexico, down through the Raton Pass area. There's also a threat of very large damaging hail, especially early on in the convective life cycle. And there you can see the Storm Prediction Center hail probabilities with the Hatch area for significant hail all the way back to Cheyenne. So this is probably the first significant severe weather day for southeastern Wyoming. True high plains insanity today in the wake of an MCS. So you have a complex of storms that is pushing out of Oklahoma into Arkansas today, and that is leaving away in its wake a large area of stable air. And that stable air is really the only thing that's going to preclude a more substantial severe weather event and tornado potential. I do think, though, that there is a pretty substantial threat of a derecho windbag and also a large hail event, especially early on in the convective life cycle across western Nebraska. But here you can see the dew points that have been carved out in the wake of the MCS so far this morning. Just some slightly lower dew points. Basically, all the 70s are down here in central Oklahoma in the wake of that MCS. All of these low 60s dew points and all the green that you see up here, all of this is because of the complex of storms that formed last night. There were a couple of supercell storms that moved off the eastern slopes of the Black Hills, passing into far northern Nebraska. One of them produced a landspout early on, a little bit closer to the Merriman area. But that complex of storms then dove off to the southeast and left in its wake relatively modest moisture. So the moisture has been carved out a little bit. If you had these 70s dew points sitting out here across central Kansas, then I'd be thinking that there's a pretty robust threat of even a tornado potential along that boundary if it's able to retreat off to the north. But with a relatively flat upper level trough, it doesn't excite that 40 to 50 knot low level jet that would be required to bring that big time moisture reservoir over the southern plains back up into the central plains, into the target area beneath that very strong upper level jet streak. But this is the moisture situation today, and stepping forward to about 21Z, watch how this moisture changes. It's still a little bit muddy across the central plains, and where these storms develop up across southwestern Nebraska, dew points are in the low 50s. So I do think there's going to be a rapid transition to a windbag event today. And the storms are probably going to initiate over the higher terrain across the Nebraska Panhandle by about 3 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time out here. And these are going to be capable of producing significant hail. My good friend Dan Fitz will be out there chasing these large guerrilla hail producers. But because the dew points are in the low 50s out there, it is a post-frontal environment, so the temperatures are going to be in the 70s. So cloud bases aren't going to be that astronomical. Also looks like a storm develops near the Denver area, near the airport. High plains, insane, definitely happening. Probably some elevated storms are going to initiate near the Omaha area with the potential for some substantial hail as well. Stepping forward to 23Z. This is at 6 p.m. This storm is going to be very close to the Lake McConaughey area. It's going to be a nasty eastward moving large hail producer. Might even have the chance of an isolated tornado or two there as it slides down near the I-80 corridor. Dew points are going to be about 53, 54. Temperatures are going to be about 78. So about 24-degree temperature dew point spreads. Not insane that you could definitely get a tornado. Look at these very steep lower lapse rates. We call this an inverted V sounding. This isn't a textbook inverted V sounding, but it does show some relatively dry air below cloud base, probably some relatively high base storms, but you do have this classic high plains hodograph, large hail producing hodograph as well, a ton of bulk shear, the mid and upper tropospheric flow quite strong, more than sufficient to evacuate hail and rain and other hydrometeors from the rotating updraft. And you also have these easterly surface winds with a ton of directional shear going up to southwesterly, about 1 or 2 kilometers above the ground. In the lowest levels of that sounding, you could definitely see the directional shear. The surface wind is out of the southeast, just above the ground. You shift over to southwest, and then a rapid shift to a strong westerly upper level jet, even a little bit of some northwesterlies in the upper troposphere, bringing your hodograph curve down into that corridor. That's going to cause these southeasterly moving supercells, and that's going to squeeze out a ton of storm relative inflow in the lowest 3-4 kilometers of this storm. Usually you get very large hail producers with this strong directional shear, especially when you get a little bit of a northerly component at the surface. Some of the forecast models are definitely showing that. But this storm that's going to be moving into that environment in southwestern Nebraska, large gorilla hail producer, and eventually these are going to congeal into a large-scale windbag. It does look like the HRRR tries to fire a couple of renegades in some better moisture across northern Kansas. That's going to be a little bit of a gamble play. If you want to work down in northern Kansas, you might get one of those beautiful sculpted mothership supercells across far northern Kansas. Relatively weak, low-level wind shear, though, probably is going to preclude a more substantial tornado threat. I would probably chase this monster HP supercell. It's likely going to be chucking softballs, diving off to the southeast. It's going to pass over Lake McConaughey likely. We'll likely see a megashelf or a mothership supercell passing over Lake McConaughey. And this is at 0Z, so by 7 p.m., this storm is located over McCook. Monster HP supercell diving off to the southeast by 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. This thing's really becoming HP. It's starting to close in on the Kansas border. Mega windbag potential, closing in on the Kansas border, diving off to the southeast. That's 8 p.m. 9 p.m. slides into northern Kansas, and then you get the development of these elevated supercells across southeastern Nebraska, even over into southwestern Iowa. So these are also going to have the potential of producing significant severe weather, more than likely very large hail, strong damaging winds, but the more significant straight line winds are going to be associated with this convective complex. It's going to be pushing into northern Kansas by 8 or 9 p.m. Basically, if I were chasing this event, I would set up right over Lake McConaughey. I'd be cooking brats on Lake McConaughey, just waiting for that supercell storm to mature and come out of the Nebraska Panhandle. Might even get aggressive with it and try to get some large hail early on in the Nebraska Panhandle. And then I would chase the HP supercell from Lake McConaughey through McCook down into northern Kansas. Large windbag, large hail. Definitely some threat of some large hailers as well off to the east. This is about 8, 9 p.m. in the evening now as that windbag is pushing off to the southeast. 10 p.m., it arrives in Salina, the windbag near the I-70 corridor, Russell back toward Hayes. You also get these supercells moving out of eastern Colorado into western Kansas. Yesterday when we looked at the models, that looked like the more favorable setup. But this one is setting up to be a massive windbag that eventually arrives in Kansas City by about midnight, central Kansas as well. You even get a couple bubblers down in the Texas Panhandle. I saw some of those videos this morning of a beautiful mothership supercell to the northwest of Amarillo just after sunset that was lighting up the night skies. Beautiful Amarillo skyline. High plains drifters out there dominating this severe weather setup. Let's now take a look at the 3-kilometer NAM model. We also need to look at a surface map. But this is the morning 3-kilometer NAM. It shows the complex of storms moving through central and eastern Oklahoma. So far this morning, that's going to pass into Arkansas. Might even have a threat of damaging wind as it matures and convection reinvigorates a little bit later on this afternoon. But we want to take a look at what this does with the moisture coming up into Nebraska for the windbag potential and for the gorilla hail potential. A lot of times the 3-kilometer NAM can do a little bit better with the moisture return across the high plains, a little bit less in the terms of the massive mixing. It looks like the 3-kilometer NAM and the HRRR are in pretty strong agreement with these low to middle 50s dew points streaming northward into the Nebraska Panhandle. A little better dew points across the far northeastern tip of Colorado, mid to upper 50s dew points, and you can see this ribbon of decent dew points streaming right into southwestern Nebraska. McCook, the nose of that, located very close to Lake McConaughey by 19Z. And then you step forward to about 4 p.m. and you still have these upper 50s dew points. That's the ribbon of moisture that you'll have to chase. That's going to feed right to the gorilla hail producer, basically a highway of instability up to where these develop. This is the main outflow boundary from the complex of storms that's existing right now in Oklahoma. That's the untainted instability down along the Red River. We point that north just a little bit. But we get some post-frontal, post-outflow boundary destabilization that happens further north, and that's setting the stage for large hail, potential damaging winds. This is the parent outflow boundary, we'll call it. With the complex of storms, it's going to move out of Oklahoma and across Arkansas. Untainted moisture down here near 70s dew points. Maybe you should target down near Childress. Might get some pretty healthy convection. Could also target Raton Pass, northeastern New Mexico, far southeastern Colorado, west of Raton in the Trinidad area. But it does look like the secondary outflow boundary further north is also going to destabilize a bit, and that's going to be the target today. I would probably even target a northeastern Colorado, Sterling area, west of Lake McConaughey. It does look like there's some greater instability across northeastern Colorado. You do have this relatively favorable parameter space off to the east across the Nebraska-Kansas border. I wonder if that's going to remain capped through late afternoon into the evening hours, and you might need these winds shifting, surface winds shifting to a more easterly direction, upslope across the true high plains of northeastern Colorado to initiate those storms. Maybe up near the southern Nebraska Panhandle, along the northern gradient of that instability would also be a pretty good target to get in early on those large hail-producing supercells, and they're just going to ride right along this boundary, ride right into those northeasterly surface winds. Incredible structure, large hail, and then it's going to congeal into a complex of storms, or maybe one of these little mini bow echoes capable of producing significant wind as it moves into southwestern Nebraska later on this evening. Let's see what the 3-kilometer NAM shows in terms of the convective evolution. By 21Z, the 3-kilometer NAM has southeastern Wyoming getting worked north of Cheyenne, Chugwater area, across the northwestern Nebraska Panhandle. Another cluster of supercells develops down near Cheyenne into the southwestern Nebraska Panhandle. These are going to be capable of producing very large hail. Wouldn't even be surprised to see a couple of tornado warnings from those storms as they move out of the Nebraska Panhandle toward 4 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Look at these storms across the Nebraska Panhandle. Another one comes out of the Denver area, out near the Denver airport. So I think today the storm chasers that play out east could potentially get burnt, whereas the storm chasers that are playing the high plains event, post-frontal, wind shifting to a more easterly direction, probably going to get more in the way of these supercell storms and maybe even a tornado or two, Nebraska Panhandle into northeastern Colorado. This is at 6 p.m. Central Daylight Time, 5 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. The 3-kilometer NAM does form a renegade supercell out further east. Slightly better dew points, 61 to 64 out there in that post-frontal environment. Relatively flat photographs, but a southeasterly moving storm might have a greater chance of producing a tornado. But usually, you can see this is a textbook southeasterly moving supercell, large hail producing photograph right along the Kansas-Nebraska border. I do wonder if this is going to materialize. There could be some strong capping out further east that might prevent some of these renegades from forming. Stout elevated mix layer, 80 over 62, decent thermodynamic environment. Cap is breached, though, relatively easily, according to the 3-kilometer NAM. Southeast storm motion at about 10 to 15. You'd like to see a greater low-level jet. And if we did have a stronger 1-kilometer wind, see how the low-level jet is really weak. It's basically 15 knots at the absolute greatest. And that's why the low-level shear, and that's at 6 p.m. So that's why the low-level shear is not great in the ambient environment. But if you can get one of these supercells to bomb off to the southeast, it might kind of create its own low-level jet in a storm relative sense. That's why these southeasterly movers sometimes will develop greater tornado potential when they bomb off to the southeast. Surface winds, you have this easterly ribbon post-frontal environment out here that feeds into northeastern Colorado. See that ribbon of easterlies? The northerlies in the wake of that complex of storms are going to shift to a more easterly direction. And they're going to continue to transport that moisture upstream. Probably should make sure that I'm live in the first place. Does look like I'm live. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Be sure to sign up for those notifications because I may go live later on today for a radar breakdown as these storms develop. But I would be chasing this event, but I'm still waiting to get my car fixed. I almost flew in for this setup as well and rent a car, but prices are extremely expensive for flights. But here is that ribbon of easterlies right across the Nebraska-Kansas border feeding into northeastern Colorado. That's the target today. I think that supercells are going to develop across southeastern Wyoming, Nebraska Panhandle, also close to the Denver airport. And then they're going to pass into that corridor of easterly winds, dropping very substantial hail by about 4, 5, 6, 7 p.m. They're going to arrive here in southwestern Nebraska. And by that time, they're going to start to bow out, and then you're going to have a transition from very large hail to more of a windbag potential. See how these surface winds start to develop just a little bit of a northerly component by about 0Z? Still, at the 3-kilometer NAM is very consistent with the development of this renegade near the Nebraska-Kansas border that even evolves up near the I-80 corridor. It's possible it's going to be a little bit elevated, but all the soundings show that that cap is going to be breached and that that's going to be a surface-based storm. Basically, when that dotted line kind of is able to clear the capping inversion or the slight increase in temperature, then those parcels are able to go all the way up to the tropopause, a ton of CAPE. The convective available potential energy is proportional to the area that's enclosed by the parcel ascent, which is the dotted line, and the environmental temperature, which is the red line. As long as that dashed line is warmer than the red line, those parcels in the air is positively buoyant and will rise all the way up to the equilibrium level. That's the top that basically represents the tropopause, which is relatively high up in the atmosphere during the summer, during peak summer conditions. But these straight line photographs, as we call them, will favor left and right moving supercells. If you have a much stronger curved photograph, like we often see in Dixie Alley in the early season, that type of a photograph very strongly favors the right moving supercell, and a lot of times the left mover will be much more suppressed and a lot weaker with that environment. But when you get these more straight line photographs, then the left and the right mover are relatively equally favored, and you kind of get equally intense left and right movers. But you do get a little bit of cyclonic curvature out there, which should favor the right mover just a little bit. But what you'll see as a supercell matures and develops a rotating updraft, you'll see them on radar split apart. The right mover moving towards the equator, left mover moves toward the poles. The opposite is true in the southern hemisphere, with the left mover being dominant, moving toward the equator, right mover peeling off toward the South Pole. I did chase in Argentina about 12 years ago. It was a little bit confusing chasing after the left mover, but you could definitely see that streamer of moisture kind of streaming in toward the northern base of the left moving supercell. Northerly winds being a warm, moist wind off the Amazon basin, which is the moisture source for the South American tornado alley, whereas the moisture source for the North American tornado alley up here in the Gulf of Mexico. But you're not seeing a ton of the bright colors that you normally see with a traditional severe weather setup, or like you'd see in the Great Plains, for example, like one of the setups like the Andover one that we were chasing. And that's because this whole area here has been carved out by a massive complex of storms that's going to move out of Oklahoma and toward Arkansas. That complex of storms initiated off the Black Hills, way off to the north, and you do get a little bit of instability that feeds in along the Kansas-Nebraska border and back toward the Denver International Airport. Northerly winds will shift to a more easterly direction. This is textbook high plains insanity, post-outflow boundary environment. Big gorilla hail producers move through northeastern Colorado, eventually into southwestern Nebraska, but only on the far northwestern periphery of that cold pool. It's basically a destabilized, already moderated post-outflow boundary environment that these things are going to be moving on relatively, but they're not going to be that high base because the temperatures cool off as well behind a massive MCS. The untainted air way down there across the Red River and the Childress area. There's the 3-kilometer NAM. There's the HRRR. A little bit further south as well, the HRRR favors those renegades down near Colby. So really, as a storm chaser, you're going to have to decide whether you want to gamble on a little bit greater moisture, some low 60s dew points, temperatures into the low 80s, a little bit greater instability. The short-range models are definitely showing the formation of a renegade supercell out there. Or do you bank on these hailers that'll be coming out, bombing down toward Lake McConaughey, McCook area, northeastern Colorado? I could even see kind of a favorable setup out near the Denver International Airport. High plains insanity. And it does look like the 3-kilometer NAM hints at just a little bit of low-level stable air to the east of those renegade storms, but you do have a much more favorable hodograph here that favors the right moving supercell just a little bit more. Kind of reminds me of that Simla day in Colorado where you have an option of targeting out east with a little bit favor moisture, or do you play off the terrain? The difference, though, is that it is a little bit drier this year with a year 2 La Nina across the high plains. You can see dew points even along the foothills, 20s into the 30s across the Colorado foothills. HRRR, though, does try to bring a ribbon of moisture into the far northeastern corner of Colorado. And you can see this deeper dew point, modified dew points, but low 60s dew points streaming up to the I-70 corridor up near Colby. Flat ass photographs, though. I do want to work in this hodograph product now. So the hodograph is a way to visualize wind shear and to see how supportive it is for tornado potential. These are plotted every grid point. Cameron Nixon coined this product here. Did a great job with that, just plotting these hodographs every single grid point. And you can see that a lot of these hodographs are straight line, even up in the Nebraska Panhandle. That doesn't really favor tornadoes, but it does favor splitting large hail-producing supercell storms, which is what the initial mode is going to be, Nebraska Panhandle and northeastern Colorado. The best photographs you can see with a little bit of curvature are out further east. There's a curved hodograph. There's a slightly curved hodograph as well. There's a curved hodograph. So once these large hail producers are able to move into this environment, into those easterlies, the hodographs are in better shape for the right mover to be dominant, and maybe even an isolated tornado or two within that environment. But I do think you're going to have to play this ribbon of low 60s dew point set is nosing up to the Colby area. Maybe bank on those convective allowing models that are firing that renegade out ahead of the jet streak that's going to be moving across this area. Yeah, the low-level shear is definitely not incredible. That is at 21Z. You go to 23Z, and there's a much better photographs. Look at the surface-based cape overlay. You can also see some pretty good cape. You see two ribbons of cape. This one pointing in toward Lake McConaughey. And then this one across north central Kansas is associated with those low 60s dew points. And possibly on the nose of that greater instability out near Colby, you could get the development of a renegade supercell within that environment. Modified dew points, but at least they're in the low 60s. You're talking 50s dew points out here across High Plains and Sanity, where those large hail producers are going to develop. Little ribbon of cape feeds all the way up to Scotts Bluff, where you're probably going to get some of those high-based hail producers 4, 5, 6 p.m. They're going to turn into a complex of storms and then move into this deeper moisture. Tornado threat all depends on if the cap can be breached on the nose of that moisture across north central Kansas and up to the Nebraska-Kansas border. Photograph still quite curved right there. Look at that photograph. Decent photograph as well within that unstable environment. 0Z, even better photographs across this area. Slightly better instability too. You even get up above 3,000 cape near the Colby area. Nicely curved photographs across southern Nebraska. So see how that photograph curvature gets much in better shape? And you even have a curved one down here. This is your cape blob in excess of 3,000 cape. And you can see those holes within the cape as well. That is the HRRR that is suggesting formation of a renegade supercell very close to the Colby, Kansas area. Slides into that environment. Will have the potential of producing large hail, maybe even an isolated tornado as it moves off to the east. Definitely ring those notification bells, everybody, because if this scenario happens, I'll likely be going live because of the impactful severe weather, and I could certainly even get a little tornado out of that. And there's your renegade storm that develops near Colby at about 5 to 6 p.m. You can see the left split's a little bit suppressed. The model is probably picking up on those more curved photographs and the slight favoritism of the right mover. And then it dies by about 8 p.m. This thing dominates, and then you're transitioning to a mega windbag as the main event arrives on the Kansas-Nebraska border. High base supercells down across eastern Colorado, moving into western Kansas. It looked like you were going to have some untainted moisture that might even be streaming up into southwestern Kansas toward the Lamar area when we were looking at the models yesterday for this setup. That would lead to more significant severe weather across southeastern Colorado. But now it looks like hail producers turning into a windbag, maybe the threat of a renegade storm out near Colby, Kansas. I do want to discuss quick too the shape of this trough and how it differs from some of the previous events that we've chased so far this year. And this is the definition of a flat trough right here. This is the trough that's causing the severe weather today that might excite this derecho. You do have a consolidated jet, and it is anomalously far south for the summer. That's why we're getting day after day after day of severe weather. And this thing is also coming into a bit of a northwest flow event with this ridge off to the west side. But if this trough were a lot deeper, higher amplitude, basically a stronger storm system, if it were shaped like this, then it would excite a very strong low-level jet, 40, 50 knots, that likely would be capable of bringing this moisture all the way up from the southern plains, lifting it up to the favorable kinematics. But because we had that complex of storms last night, that's the complex is currently moving out of Oklahoma and into Arkansas. Some pretty decent mid-level flow down there in bulk shear for updraft organization. That's why there's a slight risk of severe weather down south as well. But that carved out the moisture, and it removed the moisture from the favorable winds. It removed the moisture from the jet dynamics, and that's why we don't have just a massive moderate risk on tap for today, but a flatter trough ejection. But a ton of bulk shear out there. Likely going to lead to a pretty significant severe weather event. I'm thinking about chasing this event when it arrives across the southeast. And I'm also watching this other event coming up on Thursday. It's northwest flow, textbook northwest flow, but I'm also seeing the potential of a windbag formation as well. This is a ridge rider. You can see this ridge that's forming across the western U.S. And then these ridge riders, another version of high plains insanity, northwest flow event across the central high plains on Thursday, northwest Kansas, southwest Nebraska, northeastern Colorado. Same area could get impacted by that again, but this is a ridge trough pattern from west to east across North America. I was looking at the long range forecast models a little bit yesterday during my live briefing as that tornado potential was happening. And there's your ridge trough. And then the development of another trough across the western U.S. that is coming in around the 12th and the 13th. Look at that trough ejection across the central plains. This is likely the event that I am eyeing right here. Big time trough ejection, large jet across the central into the northern plains. And I think that this is going to be a period of significant severe weather during the middle part of June that I'm going to be activating storm chase mode, hoping that my vehicle will be back fixed once again. And then I'm going to be targeting this event. That'll be on the 13th. Look at that moisture up into the central and northern plains. 12th into the 13th, central South Dakota. Looks like a pretty substantial event. 14th, ejection. And in its wake, you still have a relatively zonal flow, anomalously far south jet. So I was discussing with some of my fellow high plains drifters what I think about the high plains season. I wonder if during July, late June into July, that the high plains are also active. Look at this trough, very long range, even though we're way out there like 10 days. GFS, of course, spins up a hurricane late June, as usual across the Western Gulf. Don't look into that too deeply, but definitely focusing on this trough that moves into the Western U.S. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this live weather briefing. Windbag event seems pretty substantial. There you can see the Storm Prediction Center probabilities, basically from Lake McConaughey almost to the Kansas City area. Threat of large, potentially significant wind, and then also the threat of hail, basically maximized over the high plains. But once that storm kind of arrives near Lake McConaughey, arrives near the greater moisture, I do think that there is a threat of significant hail with that event as well. So thank you, everybody, for tuning into this live weather report. Many more to come. Storm chase mode will be activated very soon once I get my vehicle fixed. Probably going to be doing some radar breakdowns this evening as that windbag and large hail event takes shape across the central plains. A very impactful severe weather event happening. So thank you, everybody, for tuning into this weather report. Never